So here's something I do behind the scenes, but I don't actually ever talk about. When I make a build, whether it's in PoE 1 or PoE 2, I try to aim for it to be on the budget side of things. Especially when the league mechanic, or the base game I guess in PoE 2's case, is just a barren wasteland and there's just not much currency in the game. But every now and then I get an excuse, or in this case an event, that is just pouring out a ton of currency. If you were to pick any strategy from Harvest to Harvest all the way up to the Rogue Exiles, no matter what it is right now, you're probably making a ton of cash. Which leads me to having an excuse to go for a more expensive build project. In fact, this is probably the most expensive build I've ever made a video on. Now, don't get me wrong. I did not just like log in, put on a mage build and say, yeah, look how cool I am. What's up? What's going on, guys? 90% of my entire time working on this build was without a mage blood, without a Nimbus, and without a life. I'm still working on the life part, but the build completely works without any of the expensive items. I started out with the budget version doing just T16 maps, and then I slowly worked my way to T17s, Ubers, and I even had the stupid idea to try to farm these Omega Giga just ruin your goddamn life Rogue Exile strategy. And eventually, this build was able to handle all of it. So here's how this works. If you've ever seen the Trickster Splitting Steel version that was popular about a year ago, then a lot of what I'm doing here should make sense. The core mechanic is based around the idea of the ephemeral edge. The idea is pretty simple. You just stack energy shield and that gives you lightning damage. And then my skill of choice is Splitting Steel. The idea for Splitting Steel is that you just want more projectiles. If you don't know exactly how it works, then here's a summary. You attack, the projectiles will then split out, and then if you're running either return projectiles or a Nimbus, then they'll return back to the target, which just means that the more projectiles you have, the more damage you do. There's a lot more scaling going on obviously between the ephemeral edge and Splitting Steel, but I'll save that for later. For now, let's just talk about why I picked Scavenger. The Cloak of Flame node is pretty self-explanatory. It's just way too good, you kind of have to take it. The Cerberus Limb node though is really good if you can take advantage of all these shield values, and in this case, an Aegis Aurora is the perfect item to do just that. And the biggest reason that this build worked, even when I was on a budget, all the way till the end game, is because of Fury Valve. Like I said earlier, the more projectiles you have, the more damage you do. So I mentioned earlier that this was a project, not just a build guide, and the reason is because Splitting Steel is one of these abilities that, well, for me, I personally just enjoy it. I can't really explain why. There's just something about it I just like. And the other reason is because every 5 or 10 divines you put into this character, you will always either get tankier or you will get more damage. Even in my final version, which is hundreds of divines spent, I know I can add more. And I just simply said, enough is enough. I reached what my goal was. I'm good. Now, because we are a few weeks into this event, I'm not going to go for the super budget versions. I'm going and skipping straight to the meat and the potatoes, but the POB will have all the stages of all the gearing I went through. And in fact, you can see this stash tab where I just dump all the gear that I used for this character, and well, future me is going to have to organize this and fit it into the POB, but I guess that's his job, not mine. Now, the most important item to really jumpstart your damage outside of the ephemeral edge is going to be a Voice of the Storm. Now, if you don't know why, it's because lightning damage has a ridiculous range of damage that it can roll. So the point of the Voice of the Storm is to make your lightning damage rolls a lot more consistent. For example, Path of Building says my Voice of the Storm accounts for 32% of all of my damage. So yeah, that's pretty good. Now, I'd never used these gloves before, but I cannot deny the value for how cheap they are is pretty goddamn nuts. Soul Ascension gloves. They give you Soul Eater stacks when you hit a rare or unique monster. So basically, the juicier your maps are, the easier it is to sustain 45 or more Soul Eater stacks. And that's what's giving me that supersonic speed you see when I'm dashing around in the background. Shavron's Revelation, it needs to be worn on the left side of your ring slot, but basically this is just a fat ass energy shield stick. And that's all there is to it. Now, there are 2 elephants in the room. One of them is the Nimbus. Like I said though, I was farming T17s while I was saving up to buy a Nimbus. But look, I just can't deny it. Nimbus is a crazy ass item for Splitting Steel. If you don't know why, here's just a quick TLDR. Before you have a Nimbus, you have to use Return Projectile Support. Return Projectile Support has a line that says you do less damage when the projectiles return. So just by putting on the Nimbus, you would gain 61% more damage. But on top of that, you also would gain a new 6 link by dropping the support gem. So yeah, Nimbus is a absolutely nutty item, but I did not need it to start farming T17. The other elephant in the room is a Mage Blood, but unlike the Nimbus, this does nothing for damage. It's just simply for defense stacking. The only content that I needed this for was when I wanted to do these fully juiced 144% explicit modifier effect rogue exiles. Yeah, it turns out that when you juice things that much, they get crazy, so I needed a mage build to do that. Otherwise, you don't need one. Now, before I go into crafting, let me just go over a few jewels and explain why they're so good. Unnatural Instinct is just one of those jewels that's just, it's too good to pass up. For example, just by putting it right here in this area, it gives me 11% more damage, block chance, spell block, and resistance. On the other hand, a Light of Meaning, if you put it in this area, gives me around 4,000 energy shield. And when energy shield equals damage, regardless of price, I can't deny it. It's just too good to pass up. I did run a Forbidden Jewel setup and I chose Deadeye on the Scion tree. Now here's the deal. You do not need to run Deadeye. In fact, I have other options you can run that would make your gearing easier, potentially do more damage, or be tankier. But for me, Deadeye just made more sense for my specific setup. I'll go over some different options later. Now, one thing I haven't mentioned is Sniper's Mark, and the way Sniper's Mark works is that it just gives you 2 extra projectiles. If you get Mark Effect though, up to 50%, then you can get an extra projectile. So I have a bunch of tattoos. I think I have 13 with my setup in order to get that extra 3rd projectile. If you don't know how much curse effect you have, you can always go into POB, pick Sniper's Mark, and then right here, it'll tell you how much you have. Now, to make this make sense, you have to understand what I was aiming for. Now, after I had killed T17s and I started doing Uber bosses, I knew that Rogue Exiles were kind of the new final boss, if that makes sense. So I set a goal out that I wanted this build to be able to kill them, which meant I needed to get tankier. So I wanted to run Determination, Grace, Discipline, and Tempest Shield all so I could handle the Rogue Exile. And when you're running that many auras, you have to do things like make a helmet and chest piece that have Essence Mana Reservation fractured on them. Now, these are both crafted the exact same way, so I'm just going to go over how I did the chest, and that should make sense for the rest of the pieces. It's pretty simple, but it can be expensive. Basically, you just smack a Deafening Essence of Loathing, and you just pray that the Fracturing Orb hits. Once you've done that, you have to really ask yourself this question: what tier of energy shield rolls are you willing to settle on? For me, I told myself 2 tier 2 rolls and 1 tier 1 roll would be good enough, so I just spammed dense fossils until I got what I wanted. There's no trick here, there's no tech, you just spam away and just hope that your money stops disappearing. Now next is the RNG part, and it really depends on you. If you want to min-max, then Int is the best choice you can go for this build, right? So what you would do is you make sure Eater of Worlds is the dominant influence on the item, and you spam Eldritch Currency, spam Eldritch Exalts, Eldritch Annuls, Eldritch Chaos Orbs, and you're just doing that over and over again until you get an int roll that you're happy with. This is something that is called like deterministic crafting, where you know you can get the outcome, you just don't know how much you're gonna have to spend to get it. Now the boots are crafted the exact same way as the helmet and the chest, but in order to get move speed, you'll have to do either one of 2 things, and both suck. You either have to craft prefixes cannot be changed, and then you either gamble with a Veiled Orb, or you can use the Harvest Bench and use remove a mod, add a mod, and you're targeting speed, and that might get you the move speed roll. Both of these are kind of gambles, they suck, good luck. Now, the craziest RNG I had during this entire project was not the clip of me dropping an Akora's Lock. It wasn't even the Mage Blood, because the actual craziest luck I had was making this jewel in under 10 divines. I got really lucky. Like really fucking lucky. Now to run Determination, I had to fix my strength issue, so I needed to get a +4 all attributes large cluster, so I made one. These are pretty cheap, you could just buy them, but I chose to make it. The painful part is crafting the perfect jewel. And look, there's plenty of videos out there that explain the odds and trying to craft it, but basically all I did was just spam Defense Harvest Juice or Speed Harvest Juice, and I did that until I hit a tier 1 roll. For example, if I hit tier 1 energy shield, and then I would start exalting and annulling until I basically made this jewel. The crazy part was I made this jewel in 5 clicks. I annulled once and I exalted once, and it was done. I wasn't even recording because there's just no way I thought I would get it that fast. Unfortunately, I did. But at the time I had just bought a Nimbus, so I was completely broke, so that was a welcome surprise. You don't need a perfect jewel. You don't need a jewel like this. These are way too overpriced. They're pretty good, but not needed. Feel free to run a budget version and just move on with your life. And that's pretty much it for the gear. If I didn't mention anything, then it's probably just self-explanatory. The rest is just very basic stuff. What I'm going to go over next is options, tips, just different things you can do with a build like this, because there are so many ways you can build this character. For example, I have a thing called a Megalonomach, and this was perfect for what I wanted to do. It gave me spell suppression, avoid elements, and blood scent. but this just might not be available in the market. So I'll just go over some things you can do differently to ideally make the build a lot cheaper. Now, the number one piece of advice I would give you is that just because I took 2 Forbidden Fleshes and got Deadeye does not mean you have to. The number one option to make your gearing as easy as possible is actually Warden. 20% suppression will make your gearing a lot easier. The reason I went for Deadeye and everything like that is because, well, I showed it earlier, but I have a Watcher's Eye with suppression and I have the Megalonomach with suppression. Without that, I would struggle on suppression. So feel free to go ahead and take Warden, it's very cheap. The best damage option you can go for is Trickster, but in order to make that work, you're probably going to need to wear a chest like this. It's a necrotic chest. You'd probably have to get suppression on it. It's going to be a little bit harder to roll, but the trade-off though would be, you wouldn't need a Megalonomach. You could get the Trickster node. You'd be tankier. You'd have still, very good damage. Basically, kind of tinker with stuff if you want. Otherwise, you can mostly just copy what I did. You should be fine. If you're trying to try the build out and you don't have a ton of money, then you may not be able to start with a Resolute Technique Ephemeral Edge. It's not that big a deal. What you'll do is probably just run Precision and maybe drop like Tempest Shield, and then Precision will carry your accuracy early on. Check your PUB obviously to make sure accuracy is good, but ideally you do want to get the Resolute Technique thing as early as possible. Just makes your life a lot easier. If you're ever running a Rogue Exile map or something very difficult, keep in mind that this Mark Mastery wheel here is just genuinely insane. Mark Masteries have things like enemies cannot regenerate life. That's really useful when you're running Giga Juiced Rogue Exiles that have Consecrated Ground or Regen. 10% chance to get a Frenzy Charge is really good. And then marked enemies cannot deal critical strikes. Again, if you roll a absolute just bullshit fucked up map, that can just bail you out very easily. If you don't have access to a Megalonomach like this, then what you can do is just run a small cluster with just 2-pointer and then just take Elegant Form. It's not the best, but it'll get it done in a jiff. And then just take Blood Scent and then just replace either Feed the Fury or Veteran Defender. If you don't know what Blood Scent does, it just gives you Rage. Rage is just more damage. If you're feeling lazy, just go ahead and take these suppression nodes, especially if you don't want to make a necrotic chest and you'd rather just, make a Twilight Regalia. These aren't that bad, they're not that efficient, but you don't have to min-max like I did. I just did it because I could. Now the easiest way to get your Mage Blood, 90 max res is to obviously wear an Aegis Aurora. That gives you +5 max cold res, but you need to get to the rest of the 90. So running an Impossible Escape is your easiest solution. I went for Unwavering Stance because this cost me 6 div, and it's here. You get that +1 cold and you get +2 max res. I don't know why, but the Avatar of Fire version, well, at least last I checked, was like 65 divines for the exact same effect. I don't know what's going on, just buy the cheapest one. And that's basically it. Everything else can be intertwined or changed. Those are kind of just the big things I wanted to mention real quick. Now, if you're still playing Phrecia and you're struggling with money, or you want to know how I made some money, look, this is kind of a secret part of the video. I'm just going to tell you how I made, I think, 200 to 250 divines just crafting stuff. Yes, that's my big secret. I just craft stuff sometimes. So in this case, these boots right here, I just make them over and over again, and I'll just do a live quick demonstration. I have a bunch of boots here. They're all level 86. You get the hollow. We annul. That's 4 mods. Fracturing Orbit. And look at that. So that right there is 30 divines. But let's say for some reason if the Abyssal Socket didn't work. So basically it's a 50% chance. So I'll show you what I would do if it failed. So this one should most likely fail. Okay, it didn't. All right, well, look, I made a lot of money. This isn't normally what's supposed to happen. Okay, give me a second. All right, so on one hand, yeah, you can see why, those boots right there are worth 50 divines. So that's how much that is. But I'm supposed to fail to show you how to, do the backup plan. So there, they failed. And what I would do is I would just recombinate. So all I would do is just go over here. And you want 1 suffix. Go here. Recombinate. The Abyss Socket moved over. That saves you some money from having to buy the hollow orb thing again. That, and then a fracturing orb. We missed it, but ideally, you would just rinse and repeat this same system over and over again. And this is one of the ways I made the most money. Another way I did it was crafting the jewel, the same jewel that we use for our build, but instead of all attributes, you go for int. You're looking for tier 1 int, tier 1 35%. Fracturing Orbit, I sold those for 25 divines plus as well. I also crafted the Race Spectre boots from my last build guide because, I don't know, I was just bored and I crafted like 10 pairs of those. I sold them at like 15 divines each. And then I would go look at whatever the most popular build was, which was Lightning Strike, look at maybe a shield they needed, try to craft that. Sometimes I made money, sometimes I didn't, but most of my money came from these boots, crafting jewels and Race Spectre boots. That's pretty much it. That was about 200-ish to 250 divines worth of my money. Good luck, have fun, you're welcome. And that's pretty much all I think I need to talk about for the build. It's a very end game, it's a very project oriented build. I spent about 5 to 6 days working on it. A big problem was that the Rogue Exile idle setup cost me 200 to 300 divines. It's pretty much the same cost as this character, so that's kind of why it took so long. Otherwise this could have been done, 3 days ago. But that's it for me. I hope you have a good one. Enjoy the secret crafting tips, and I'll catch you later.